Alright, welcome to the next part of this tutorial. So what we're going to be talking about is HDRIs, the HDRI editor, as well as all of the features within this tab. I think it's one of the most important, if not the most amazing things in KeyShot. To me, it's one of the reasons that I use KeyShot is because it's so quick and easy to just make some lighting. I don't go and download HDRIs. Like, I have some. There's some that I've downloaded. But I don't use them very much. I use them sometimes, but usually I'm doing like more of a studio lighting setup rather than indoor and outdoor. So let's just start really simple. What is an HDRI? Well, for those who don't know what an HDRI is, it's an image that's used to cast light on an object, or the light is taken from the image. So if you have bright values, these are going to be lights essentially that are hitting the model. Basically, what we're going to be doing is creating our own. Now, something that's really important to note is that when you're making an HDRI, you're actually working in 3D space. You're not working on a flat plane. This is actually mapped to a sphere, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to make a new light. I'm going to place it up at the top. The top of the image is actually the very highest point on the sphere. It's the very top of it. So if I hide this ground plane and I put a light on the bottom, it's actually going to be the bottom of the image. So what you're going to see is that once you start moving it around in 3D space, you're actually affecting this light in a spherical manner rather than just some sort of plane. So you kind of will get a feel for eventually where on the sphere you're rotating stuff. But yeah, that's kind of like the basic idea and principle behind it. So with that out of the way, let's just start very simply. Let's just show some of the more simple things in the tools. So let's just talk about just the tools for now. And then eventually we're going to do some scenes and light stuff, and I'll do a quick demo in this one. Alright, so this is super important. If we go to the settings tab, you're going to see this brightness channel, or this brightness slider. It allows you to adjust the brightness of your HDRI globally. This may seem like a great thing at first, but it's actually not, and I highly suggest avoiding this at all costs. Like, let's say, for example, you have an outdoor scene. You might think, oh, it's great, it's brighter now, it was too dark. If you're willing to sacrifice it being potentially inaccurate or messing up all of your other HDRIs, then go for it. But here's the thing. When you're making materials, and I know this isn't talking about the tools, but this is super important. When you're making materials, and it's very important to be switching between HDRIs to make sure that it's looking good in all of them. But if you adjust the HDRI's values, all of a sudden your materials are going to be adjusted to match. And so it's very crucial that you just it might seem fun at first, but like, oh yeah, let's adjust this brightness. Don't. Just keep that how it is, unless you're aware of what you could potentially be doing. Because when you're making materials, it's important to be switching through the HDRIs. All right, we got that out of the way. So a few simple things. Let's go to the free camera. Zoom way out. You'll notice that this area right here, this is the extent of the size. So you can make this HDRI bigger or smaller, depending on your preferences. You can change the height of it in the scene. Nothing too special. And then also, very importantly, you can rotate it. And so I actually use this all of the time. Or at least I used to use this all of the time. When I was using pre-made HDRIs, or if I'm not making my own, I rotate HDRIs a lot because then you can get different types of lighting. But I'm not using that so much anymore. But it's an amazing feature. Alright, the next thing to talk about, let's hide this plane, is the lighting environment. So you can actually do different backgrounds on your rendering. You can do the lighting environment if you'd like. It's up to you. You can do the lighting environment. You can do a color. I generally render with black, just because that's what I like. Or you can do a backplate image. So we actually have the backplates here. So you could do a backplate image. I seldom use this feature. So let's go back to what we had. Awesome. Camera is the right one? Perfect. All right. The next and other most important thing is the idea of using these. In the ground tab, we have the ground reflections. And so I use this one actually quite a bit. Actually, let's go back and let's switch this to color so we don't, you can see actually we're getting the HDRI in there. We don't want that, or I don't want that. So I won't be ending up using that as a background. Alright, cool. So we can add ground reflections and occlusion shadows. So the occlusion shadows, if we turn up the brightness, you can see are here. And so it's important to note that when you're using these two features, if you're rendering with an alpha channel, or more importantly without one, this will be included in the image. So let's say you wanted to add a background or something, or you just want to do something in post. If you have this feature enabled, it will be showing up in the alpha channel as well. So that's why I said before, always use a clown mask. If you use a clown mask, you can select the gun and still have the occlusion and reflections. It'll be nice. But we're not using that right now. But we could still turn it on, but there's no real reason. So I'm going to go back, add my ground plane, and go back to my camera angle. Alright, so it's very simple and straightforward, like all of KeyShot. This is the settings tab. Let's go to the HDRI editor. So here, there's a lot of things that you can use. You can use the canvas for editing if you'd like, which makes it bigger. I used to use this in the older versions of KeyShot. I don't need this anymore. I don't find it important. You can export HDRI, save it to your library. You can add an image pin, a gradient pin, a copy pin, which is more like an instance, or just a regular pin. And pins are what we're calling lights in here. Over here, we have delete, move up and down, new group or folder, which is super important, and I will explain why in a second, because to me, it's one of my favorite features about KeyShot at the moment, as well as the set highlight, which I covered briefly in the introductory video. We can also add the background. We can change it to a gradient and adjust the values here. We can adjust the resolution of our HDRI. We can set the background to a sun and a sky. We can change the time of day. We can change all sorts of things about it, or we can add an image. I usually just stick with a color and I make it black. Alright, so that pretty much covers most of these tools, but so now what we're going to do is that we're going to talk about groups and we're going to do a quick lighting setup. Alright, and I'm going to show why groups are awesome. So let's say, for example, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cameras with different things going on each one. Now let's make a new camera simply because I'm not using the same aspect ratio. You remember we talked about lock aspect? I'm not using the same aspect ratio as I was on my home PC. I'm on a laptop at the moment. So I'm making a new camera, and we'd typically crop this image. And I'm going to explain why groups are literally the best thing on the planet Earth. Alright, so let's go back to camera 1. You'll see right now the lighting is perfect. It's exactly how we wanted it. If we go to this group, you can see that we have a bunch of little pins in here. And each one of these is a light. We have different types, etc. Simple. Alright, let's just relight this, and then we'll use the groups and I'll demonstrate. So I'm going to go to this camera and we're going to light it from this angle, the one that we just created. As I mentioned before, the top of this HDRI is what's going to be broadcasting. So okay, let's go and talk about the pins before we do this full lighting demo. Alright, so in the pins, we have two types. We have circular and rectangular. Rectangular pins are rectangular, and you can see also how the pin is being distorted as it's moving along this spherical projection, right? So you can kind of visualize this a little bit easier. We have here size, and you can adjust the size on the X, the Y, or you can adjust it uniformly. I have a few tricks and tips that I won't go into too much, but I'll say a few of them in this area. We also have blend modes, as well as brightness and color. We also have rounding the corners of this box. We have angle, so you can rotate it, and then there's also fall off. Typically, I find myself using the circular lights and sometimes squares. It just really depends on what I'm going for. But in this case, let's just keep it pretty simple, and we'll just try and make it look decent. And then I'll talk about why groups are amazing in a second. Alright. So what I'm looking for right now is just some sort of main light. So let's just add a few lights and start moving them around. I usually like to get a main light that lights up the side of the gun. We're going to adjust the brightness a bit. And the most important thing, and we're going to cover all of this lighting theory and stuff, and this isn't going to be some fancy lighting setup. This is just some quick explanation and showing the tools. But it's very important to me to be having all of the forms reading nicely. And that's something we're going to go into great detail in later in the lighting theory part of this tutorial. So let's use this button here for setting the highlight, and we'll try and click so we can get a rim light going somewhere. Let's try and get it like here. And so now that we have it here, you can see we're getting this nice rim light on the edge of the gun. And we don't want it exactly there, but it gives us a good place to start figuring out where we do want it. And I want a small bit of the light to be creeping in on the floor, so it's not all the way black. And then I'm also going to go up to the top a little bit. And I want just a little bit of extra light coming in behind it. And so I just have gotten used to figuring out how the light is going to be hitting things. Let's make it a bit smaller. Don't need a crazy radius or a lot of light. Maybe some sort of line guiding the eye to the front of the gun. Alright. So let's just add a new group right here, and we'll call this side. Let's add all these pins to it. Alright, this is why I freaking love groups. Because you can do this. You can switch between cameras. Typically, I actually relight the gun for every single angle. Always. Almost always. So in this case, I want to switch between these two lighting types for these two angles without, making a new HDRI or whatever. So here, I just have one HDRI, and I can switch back between these two lighting setups per camera angle. It's super easy to do, it's super simple, and it just saves you the hassle of having to have all these HDRIs. So like for one weapon or one design, you could have 10 angles, 10 camera angles, and just 10 groups in one file, and you never have to switch to HDRs, you never have to do any of this stuff. It's all right there. You just click which group that matches the corresponding camera angle, and maybe you have a camera angle where an existing lighting setup works, and you just go through them and see what's working, what's looking cool. I'm also going to quickly demonstrate just using, so if I go back to the side 2 lighting, maybe I don't like this, and I could try rotating it for a different effect. Seeing what I do like. Maybe I decide, oh, I actually like this lighting setup more, Use this rotator sometimes. Just see how it's working, how it's looking. Maybe you like the other setup a little bit more. But yeah, so now you can see the power of this tool. It's an amazing tool. It's very powerful, and it lets you quickly set up just these awesome lighting setups so easily. So before we conclude this section, we're going to talk about one last thing. It doesn't have to do with the HDRI editor, but I just want to talk about it, and that's physical lights. So physical lights in KeyShot, lighting is generated by geometry. So if we go up here to edit, we can go to add geometry, and we can add a sphere. Just a default sphere. It'll show up here as sphere. We go to the materials tab, go to light, and we can add an area light. Let's get rid of this ground plane. Let's adjust some of the values on this light as well as the size of the model. Alright, now that's been scaled down, you can start to see the lighting is affecting the scene. And so what we're going to do is go to this material, and we're going to up the lumen to 5000. And to move this light, do it like this, using the move tool in the position editor that we discussed in the earlier tutorial. Let's just do 10,000. So there's a few things that you'll note. You'll note that if we were to turn on ground reflections, you'll notice that the light is actually showing up in the reflection. So what we do here, we go to visible and reflections, and we can also hide it from the camera, but still get the light contributing. And so I use this all the time. Physical lights can be mixed with HDRIs for lighting. They can be the sole source of lighting, and they can also provide a much more realistic type way of lighting a scene. It can make it look much better because it's not projected just from a flat screen. You know, it's behaving more like a real light would and much more naturally. So this is really simple. It's pretty straightforward. This is how the HDRI editor is working. I hope that you now see the power of this tool and the simplicity of using it. Yeah, we'll see you all in the next video.